ויאמר אלוהים, יהי רקיע בתוך המים, ויהי מבדיל בין מים למים.
If I told you that the Bible uses a single, very specific word to talk about the firmament, and that this word appears 15 times throughout the entire original text, would you stop to think, or would you move on the way you always have? Because that is exactly where most people simply stop learning. The human brain is trained to skip details when it believes it already understands a subject. This saves energy, reduces cognitive effort, and creates a false sense of comprehension. And it is precisely at this point that ancient concepts slip by unnoticed. Today, I want to talk to you without telling you what to believe. In fact, as always, right? I have never tried to impose anything on this channel. I bring information and research, and it is up to each person to seek understanding with God. In the original Hebrew text of the Bible, there is a specific technical term for what translations usually call the firmament. That word is rakia, pronounced rakia. And here is the detail that completely changes the way this topic is usually treated. This term appears exactly 15 times in the entire Hebrew Bible. 15 times. These 15 occurrences are not scattered randomly. They appear in different books, different literary genres, and different contexts, but always using the exact same term. And it is important to make something very clear from the start. In the list we are about to go through together, I did not include a single verse that uses a similar idea expressed with a different word. Not one. Only the texts that literally use the term rakia in the original. 15 times is not insignificant. 15 times, spread across books, literary styles, and centuries, all using the exact same word, is repetition enough to indicate that the authors were talking about something recognizable, understood, and real to both the writers and the readers. So the question changes completely. If this concept appears so consistently and is never redefined within the text itself, how do you think it was understood at the time it was written? That is where everything begins. Now that we have clearly defined the criteria for this list, I want to ask you for something that sounds simple, but is deeply counterintuitive for the human brain. As I go through each of these passages, try not to reach any conclusions. Do not try to fit this into modern science. Do not try to spiritualize it. Do not try to reject it. Just listen. Our brains are specialists in shortcuts. When they think they already know a subject, they stop listening. Here, the goal is to force attention to remain open for a few minutes. The first verse on the list is in Genesis chapter 1, verse 6. The text says that God said there should be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and that this firmament would serve to separate waters from waters. Notice how the text speaks. It does not explain what the firmament is. It simply states that it exists and that it fulfills a specific function. The term is presented as something that does not need to be justified. Right after that, in the second verse on the list, Genesis chapter 1 verse 7, the same term appears again. The text says that God made the firmament and separated the waters that were below the firmament from the waters that were above the firmament. The point here is not the action itself, but the natural repetition of the term, as if the reader already knew exactly what was being referenced. The third verse is in Genesis chapter 1 verse 8. There, the text states that God called the firmament heaven. Notice that it does not say the firmament symbolizes heaven. It is called heaven. The text creates no conceptual distance between the term and the reality being described. In the fourth verse on the list, Genesis chapter 1 verse 14, the text says that the lights would be placed in the firmament of the heavens to separate day from night. In the fifth verse, verse 15, the text continues by saying that these lights would illuminate the earth from the firmament. Then, in the sixth verse, Genesis chapter 1, verse 17, The text reinforces that God placed these celestial bodies in the firmament of the heavens. The same term, repeated, now associated with light, time, and the organization of the world. The 7th verse closes the section in Genesis. In Genesis chapter 1 verse 20, the text says that birds would fly across the face of the firmament of the heavens. Here, the firmament appears as a spatial reference. Again, without explanation, without declared metaphor, simply as something that is part of the environment. Now the list moves forward by centuries. The 8th verse is in Psalms chapter 19 verse 1, when the text states that the firmament declares the work of God's hands. The 9th verse in Psalm 150 verse 1 calls for praising God in the firmament of his power. The term moves from narrative into poetry, but it remains the same. The 10th verse appears in Ezekiel chapter 1 verse 22, describing something like a firmament over the heads of the living creatures. The 11th in verse 23 continues the description. The 12th in verse 25 mentions a voice above the firmament. The 13th in verse 26 speaks of something above the firmament. And the 14th verse is in Ezekiel chapter 10 verse 1, maintaining the exact same term within a complex and elevated vision. The 15th and final verse on the list is in Daniel chapter 12 verse 3, when the text compares the brightness of the wise to the radiance of the firmament. 15 times, 15 texts, the same word crossing narrative, poetry, and vision. Now, before any conclusion, I will ask you a simple question. Does this sound like something vague and abstract, or does it sound like something everyone there knew exactly what it was? In none of these 15 passages is there an explanation of what the firmament is. None at all. The term appears, performs different functions, moves through distinct literary styles, and is simply never defined. To the modern mind, this sounds strange, almost uncomfortable. We have been trained to expect footnotes, glossaries, technical definitions, and answers that fit neatly into our logical frameworks. But ancient texts do not work that way. When an ancient author does not explain a term, it usually means something very specific. It means there is no need to explain it. It means the concept is already shared between the writer and the reader. No one stops a text to explain something that everyone around them already recognizes. You do not explain what the ground is. You do not explain what the sky is. You simply use the terms, and whoever hears you already knows what you are referring to. And this is where a delicate but important point comes in. If the firmament were merely a loose metaphor, a flexible symbol, something purely poetic, what we would expect to see is variation in terminology, contextual explanations, or even disagreements over its meaning across the centuries. But what we see is the opposite. The same term is preserved, repeated, and carried intact from Genesis all the way to Daniel. So the question that remains is not whether the firmament fits into our current model of the world or not. The more honest question might be a different one. When these authors used the word rakia, were they simply embellishing abstract ideas? Or were they referring to something that, to them, was part of the actual structure of the world? I am not going to answer that for you. Think it through yourself and leave your perspective in the comments. I did exactly what I promised at the beginning of this conversation. I did not select verses for convenience. I did not mix different terms, and I did not force interpretations. I showed you 15 texts that use the same term to speak about the firmament, repeated consistently across centuries, authors, and literary styles. What you do with this says more about the way you read than about the text itself. Some people will look at this repetition and say that everything is merely symbolic ancient language, trying to explain the unexplainable, and that there is certainly no reason for such a massive deception about our world to exist. After all, who would benefit from that? And what would they gain, right? Others will notice that symbols usually vary, adapt, and change form. Here the term did not change. There are also other verses in quite curious contexts that use different terms, but offer a very peculiar understanding of the heavens. Verses I chose not to mix into this analysis. Whether these authors were speaking about something real or not is a question that requires time, reading, study, and a relationship with God. Only those willing to begin the journey will be able to find the answers. I will leave a file with all the verses mentioned in this video so you can read them calmly later. Just check the video description and download it. It is free. Write in the comments what reading these passages made you think about, and if this kind of analysis and study challenges you and awakens a deeper hunger for knowledge, stay here and subscribe. There is still a lot for us to study. The Creator made a world full of mysteries for us to uncover.